Hi friends, I'm Shauna. Welcome to the channel. Today's video is a banger. Today we're going to be talking about what I wish I knew before I started my no-buy and what I would do differently. I went on a full no-buy year in 2020 and that's how this channel got started. And right now we are at the halfway point of the year, and in my own personal experience, that is the time of year that was the most troubling or hard in my no-buy, and that's when I really experienced a lull and when I broke it, quite honestly. And so I'm really hoping that if you're in this position that this video is helpful for you. I mean, if you're on a year-long project, whether that's a no-buy or a low-buy or something similar, but neither of those things, I hope that this video helps you and provides you with motivation or ideas that you can implement on your own project. But also, if you're somebody who's been thinking about going on a no-buy or a low-buy and you haven't, and you're like, maybe I'll wait for January, there's never a wrong time to start a no-buy, never. And so this is your call, I guess, to jump on the train and go on your very own no-buy. I do want to say before we start, I followed a tutorial today for this makeup look with the retro palette. It's like one of my last bingo prompts on the board from Lyra's column. I absolutely loved this look that I did. I've had a very interesting history with the retro palette, and I love this look. I would do it again, would recommend to a friend. I'll have it linked in the description if you're interested in following the same tutorial that I did. If I had to go back in time, I would still do a no-buy. Like if I knew everything that I know now and I had the choice to do one, I absolutely would do one. I think no-buys can be very beneficial. And for a lot of people, they're just necessary if your income has decreased or you have some debt, like something's got to give. And so no matter what perspective you're coming from that compels you or makes you feel like a no-buy is for you, I think that they're helpful either way. But also I think that I know there's a lot of things that I would have done differently to be more effective and to get to where I want to be or where I am now sooner. To kick off the video, I have 10-ish things I'll be talking to you about today. And the first one I want to talk to you about, the number one thing that was wrong with my no-buy was, I think it was the foundation that it was built on, or the pedagogical perspective. The approach that I took was wrong for me. I mean, there's no real way of knowing that at the time because I don't have the knowledge that I have now. So it's like, if I could go back and tell, pre-no-buy Shauna what she could start off with, this is what I would say. Before saying what I would do differently, I'll tell you about the approach that I took. And the approach I took was real simple. I followed exactly what I saw out there already. My approach was, I will not buy things for 365 days, and here are my rules, which was a lot of the standard rules that you might have seen if you've been on no-buy channels or watched no-buy videos. Basically, replacements only. There are very, very few exceptions. And so I basically just went with what I saw. And so there was really no strategy behind the no-buy. I wasn't connecting point A with point B. Okay, so if I want to not buy things for 365 days, I had no real plan of action to make that happen. It was, I'm just not going to buy stuff. That's it. That's all I had. If I had to start over again, I would 100% focus on habits. It's habits first. Habits over everything. I would do my absolute best to remove motivation and willpower from the situation, or as much as possible, because motivation and willpower are absolutely finite resources. You will, at some point in your no-buy or low-buy, you will run out of them. They'll be gone. And maybe you'll get it back eventually, but they will disappear. When you rely on habits, you remove motivation and willpower from the scenario. Motivation can get you started on your habit or help you if you're experiencing a lull, but they're not the thing that is going to create a lasting behavioral change. And that is ultimately what I wanted to do, is to create a behavioral change. Ultimately, in my no-buy, I wanted to, relearn behaviors, but I also wanted to change my mindset and the way I think about shopping and the way I think about goods and what I think about myself in relationship to shopping. I did have goals when I first started my no-buy, but they were fairly surface level. And some of them were as simple as, not indulging every whim. That is relatively easy to do. Another one was to, learn my numbers and be up and up with my financial situation and not be scared to look at my bank account. And then there was also, how not sacrificing my financial future with stuff. I created goals based on the information I had at the time, and I just didn't I really didn't think about what comes after the no-buy. How do I make this lasting? All I really thought about was this 1 year. And I think that's because I conceptualized the no-buy as you do it and you're fixed. You do it and you're good. And that was not my reality. I really didn't think about longevity or foresight or even the how, like how do I make this happen for myself? And so what I didn't see at the beginning of the year was that shopping is a habit, and we have developed habits over time. And a habit doesn't have to be long-term or old to be compelling. You could have just had a habit for a year or even 2 years, and it's now your norm. But you could also have had one that's 20 years old and that's your norm. And so we have amassed, or we have behaviors that are learned that have stuck with us, and that is how we shop. So it's the act of shopping, but also how we think about shopping, how we think about clothes, and the narratives and things that we tell ourselves. Like, we've ingrained norms into our lives that ultimately have to be broken and changed in order to make the change permanent. And I didn't conceptualize the idea of habits and their role, but also this idea of a permanent change longer than a year. I really didn't think about how do I make, not buying things the new norm, and how do I make this ultimately like my lifestyle, and if not a no-buy lifestyle, but basically a not buying everything, being a reasonable person, aka a low buyer budget, living within my means as the lifestyle. The very first thing I would do to make this happen would be to observe my spending for an entire month via non-judgmental noticing. I would do this for either 2 weeks to a month, but I think I personally would do it for an entire month. The goal of the first month wouldn't be to actually change habits. It would be to figure out what they are. And I think non-judgmental noticing is just the way to go. Or you could just say observing. And just being an observer of your own life, your own actions, and your own thoughts, and really trying your best to not put a judgment to the action. It's kind of hard to get all the data you need from just a 1 week or 2 weeks. I mean, you could have a really great 2 weeks, and then the last 3 days of your month are trash. And if all you did was track that one week that was garbage, or that 1 week that was really, really great, you wouldn't have a complete picture of how your shopping is. And I don't think you have that in 1 month either, but it gives you a little bit more data to work with. And just in my experience, the very insidious and destructive spending doesn't happen every day. That kind of spending is saved for just the right moment, it's just saved for your most vulnerable experiences and times. And that might be once or twice a year. It could be once a month. I don't know. I don't know what your habits are. But for me, mine is not, once a week. So I think we need a little bit more data to figure that out. And so what I think is also important in here is to not just observe how you spend your money, but also how you think about money and shopping, and the narratives that you tell yourself about things or goods, products, not just the product, but also the things you tell yourself, the narratives and stories you tell yourself. So, okay, here are a couple of examples. You go to the grocery store with the grocery list, and then you go to checkout and you go, how did I spend this much? Or you see something, you go, oh, it's only $25. Did you buy a new dress because you thought it was cute? Did you walk past the Danish pastry house and want to get a pastry because you had a really bad day, but you would have if your train was not, 2 minutes out? And so I believe that if you want to change your behavior, you also need to change or consider your thoughts as well. Because a behavior is not just an act. There is a thought that compels you or entices you to make an act. So I think it's equally important to consider the thoughts that compel you or don't to make a purchase. I think it's also important to note that none of us have completely 100% negative or bad behaviors or completely 100% good behaviors. I think that there's a mixed bag in there where even if we have bad behaviors, sometimes we do well by ourselves in some circumstances. So some things that you might notice or think about noticing or observing is what compels you or convinces you to buy something. Are you drawn in by sales or low prices? Do you buy things because you saw them on TikTok or in a beauty video? Do you find yourself shopping with friends who convince you to buy something? What narratives do you tell yourself about money, finances, shopping, goods, and how that relates to you? How, if at all, do your emotions factor into your shopping? Like an example might be, I bought drinks with friends because I had a really rough day, or I bought $200 worth of candles because I couldn't cope with life today. So if you're the person who bought drinks because you had a hard day, that might be money that is genuinely a good purchase for you. Like you go, you know what, this is something that I'm very happy to participate in every once in a while, or once a week, or once a month. I think what's important here is not to think about what would the average person do, or what would my mom do, or what would X, Y, or Z person do, but like what's worth it for you. You might also want to consider, what do you spend your money on, and does this change over a month or a year? So an example would be like, did you buy planners or self-development books in January in an effort, for like a new year, new me kind of thing? Or did you buy a lot of makeup during Black Friday because there was lots of sales, but you don't really buy any makeup throughout the year? And so all of this gives us helpful data, but ultimately to give you data to consider and to really make you aware of your habits, to one, change the ones that you don't like and keep the ones that you do, and see how all of your habits play out. Because I think if we're emotional spenders, so let's say we're really compelled to buy things when we're in emotional states. So our emotional spending might play out in different ways than just buying a coffee because we're sad or going to the bar because we're sad. And I think considering the options or the circumstances to figure out what you want is helpful. So after noticing your habits and just spending time noticing, would be to then figure out how you feel about your habits and the way that you spend your money based on those habits. And figuring out what is cool with you and what is not will help you figure out the rules that you might want to enact for yourself in your no-buy. You might put money in for, let's say, books in January, but no books for the rest of the year. Let's say you've had this idea of, I'm going to remove all takeout. After you spend a month noticing, you might realize, oh, that takeout actually isn't takeout. It's purchases I bought when I'm sad. Like, let's say coffees when I'm sad, or donuts when I'm sad, or drinks with friends when I'm sad. And so if that's the case, you could leave some money in there so you're able to participate in that habit in a way that's not destructive to you financially, or you might want to work on reducing it or something else entirely. My play would not be to create rules off the bat and then fit your lifestyle into the rules. It would be to consider your lifestyle first and then create rules and guidelines that will meet how you're currently living, while also challenging you, but not to extremes in which you would chafe or you would break your no-buy. I think what would also be important to consider here would be, am I someone who needs rules, or am I somebody who would chafe against or under them? And so I think month number 2 could be an experiment in rules. I would also continue noticing patterns, and you could notice via, let's say, a daily or weekly or even bi-weekly reflection on your purchases, keeping a log of your purchases and checking in with them at whatever time period you think is best. And then you could also be reflecting back on your purchases. So after, let's say, the first month, have a reflection on what you think about these things now. And my mind would be like, if the work that you're doing in the first month The only thing is noticing behavior. For me, I would probably make time every day to think about the day, or like if I catch myself to like maybe write a little note on my phone, and that would be the only thing that I would do. So it's just notice first and then later see the patterns and, put them together and then make the rules. I have previously mentioned a motto for myself, or a kind of a saying instead of a rule, which is, does this match the spirit of the no-buy or the spirit of the project? I personally would only use this, just myself speaking, once I actually have a little practice under my belt of maintaining rules and also seeing which ones work and which ones don't. I would not implement this right out of the gate, because that kind of framework would have been way too loose for me back when I first started my no-buy, and I absolutely would have used it to my advantage to break it as much as possible, to be an excuse to shop the way that I wanted, instead of being some kind of structure that helped me. So I would eventually use this once I gained some experience and a track record, and ultimately started to trust myself to make good decisions and actually feel like I could implement that rule. And then number 3 would be to, once we've done the noticing and once we've done the rules, to spend time identifying the habits I'd like to change and then go after them one by one. So for me, I would go over the most urgent or destructive habit first. And so for me, the most urgent would have been the indulging every whim. I would go after that one first, because I think that it would be like an easier whim and one to start the no-buy off with, because you do have motivation in January, February. And so I would start there. I would feel good when I wasn't indulging every whim. It's like a really early win for myself that I think I could use and to, maintain the efforts later on. So the next thing I would do would be, and this, now we're not talking about like something in order. These are just strategies that I would use in general. So I would also track my spending in a spreadsheet that I would have started in January. Or if let's say you have it and you're just thinking about it now, start it now. And what I would do would be not just to track the money or the category, but I would also track wants, needs, and replacements. And this would be a distinction that I would have to make for each purchase. When I started my no-buy, I had a very blurred reality of what was a want versus what was a need. And I was not able to face that reality for a while. And even now, I don't get it right every time, because sometimes I try and convince myself that something's a need when it's really not. And I think one of the considerations that didn't happen at first would be actually needing something but not having the money to replace it. And that, I think that for me is still hard at times, because it's like I have 4 things that are worn out, but I can't afford to replace them all. And sometimes I've just replaced them all, and sometimes I haven't. I mean, this is not just like as of, June 2022. This is like the last year and a half. Sometimes I'll pick my battles and do it right. Other times I won't. So to be honest, this is still not perfect for me, and one that I actively need to keep my eye to. But doing this as a habit is a really eye-opening exercise if you're somebody who has just bought everything you've ever wanted or anything that you've thought about. The next thing that I would do would be to read books on habits, such as Atomic Habits, even The Upward Spiral, or similar books to kickstart the habit train to get some momentum and interest in habits. So we're going to use motivation to our advantage here, in helping us kicking our habits and figuring out what new ones to put in place, but also how to do that. One of the things I've learned in the past year is that once you've gained a habit, it never actually fully goes away. In order to kick it or change it, you have to install a new one to take its place. So this would be at the back of my mind every step of the way. If I stop lunchtime scrolling, because I typically, let's say, buy or shop for things at lunchtime, I'm going to have to figure out something else to put in its place. And it can really be as simple as bringing a book or listening to a podcast on your lunch, or going out for a walk, or eating on a bench, or leaving your phone behind. Listen, a lot of us are like super addicted to our phones and feel super awkward being out in public without them. Go sit on a park bench and observe your surroundings over lunch, you know? And also, your no-buy or changing your habits is not a race. Like, you're not racing anybody but yourself. And even then, it's not a race. So the goal for me would be to change my habit and to do it as effectively as possible, which means taking whatever time that needs, opposed to trying to fix 20 things all at once and then failing miserably and it all comes crashing down because you took on too much too fast. The next thing I would do would be to have a plan for the after. At the beginning, I would focus on habits because habits will take you into the after. Like if you learn about habits and you work on changing them, then that will take you to the after. But having a direct plan for what happens after your no-buy doesn't need to come in January or February or even June. I think maybe once you're halfway through the year, you can start to think about it. If nothing comes to mind, that's fine. But after you have some experience, you might want to reevaluate your goals, or you've gained some knowledge or perspective that was different at the beginning of the year that you couldn't have thought of at the beginning of the year. So now you're in a different place and you might have ideas now of what you want to do after. For me, this was a really big oversight, is not having a plan for what to do after my no-buy. I really believed that you did your no-buy and you were just better. Like you were just done. You were fixed. You know, you're better. My shopping is just different now. And this was not the case for me. When I came off my no-buy, I pretty quickly slipped back into old habits, and largely because there were no real habits that I learned that I was actively aware of to maintain throughout the process, but also I had absolutely nothing in place to support me after the no-buy. There was nothing there, no goals, no ideas, nothing really to help me transition out of my no-buy. And I also tried really hard to deny that it was happening. So when I was on my no-buy, the thing that stopped me from buying makeup was the fact that I was on my no-buy, which I didn't think about it until recently, but a no-buy is ultimately not real. Like it's a mental crutch that we tell ourselves to convince ourselves to do something, which is great. So in reality, you did actually not buy things, right? But the way that I conceptualized it at the time was that the choice wasn't mine, the choice was taken away from me. And that is really how it felt. And what I really needed to learn was how to have the option to buy things available to me, but then figure out how to not buy them. How do I be allowed to buy things and be okay mentally? You know, I'm no longer on a no-buy. How do you not buy things? How do you figure that out once your no-buy is over? And that is where my no-buy failed me, because I didn't prepare for how to do that. I fundamentally believe that you need a plan or something in place to transition yourself into a world where you have a healthy relationship with shopping, because you can't literally buy nothing forever. So you need to create a system or a way of thinking that you can take with you once you're done your no-buy, and so you can continue to shop without that mental crutch or having the answer of no be already decided for you. That was, for me, the toughest thing beyond the habits. I mean, the habits is still number one, but I think going off my no-buy without a plan really did a lot of damage that I would hope that you could avoid for yourself. And this is where the shopping toolkit comes in. Now, this is a concept that I've kind of borrowed from the ether, and I've heard a lot of different fields, like creative fields, you know, talk about it. I've heard it in terms of like writing workshops, you know, your writing toolkit. I actually heard a lot about this when I was an RA. Everyone talked about the toolkit on like how to deal with students, how to be an effective leader. You know, it's a proverbial toolkit. I've also heard a lot about this in like therapy settings. And so I've just taken it and applied it to the no-buy. And I think if you have this idea of creating your own toolkit at the beginning of your no-buy, like I want to look for things to put in my toolkit and actually build one out, then you will be so far ahead later. The toolkit is really anything that helps you say no or helps you talk yourself out of buying something. And they can be concepts or ideas that help you not buy them. So in mine, I have trying to try, buying to buy, treating myself. These are like, I could just put those phrases in and I know what they mean, but you could also phrase them as a question. Like, are you just trying it for the sake of trying the product? Is this a situation where you're saying treat yourself to when it's just an excuse to buy something, opposed to something that like might actually make you better? Or do you even want to treat yourself? Do you have money for that? For makeup, I also often consider, can I see myself using this to completion? This gets me like 10 out of 10 times. And then for clothing, I often will consider the cost per wear. In reality, I'm not out here being like, oh, this is $2 a wear and this is 25 cents. But I like thinking about the cost per wear in terms of thinking about longevity of the product or the item. So how much does this cost? How many times would I like to wear it? And then how many years would I have to own it in order to meet the estimated wears? I love thinking about those things together, especially with an expensive item, because to me, that's the most concrete way of thinking if this thing is worth the money. My most beloved and most used is the not now but later. So in essence, picking a time to reevaluate the purchase that you're really, really lusting after. In my experience, the waiting 14 days or waiting a week has rarely worked. Sometimes it has, but when you're really, really lusting after something and you really want it, I'm not going to wait a week. Like if I'm basically ready to impulse buy something, I'm not going to wait a week. So waiting 1 day or 2 days can just be like, just waiting a day can feel excruciating when you really want to buy something. So that has been a tool that has worked very well for me. And I also have an entire video dedicated basically this topic, but for clothing. I'll have that linked in the description box. Thinking about these things did not come naturally to me, and they took time. And even once I figured out some of these things, I didn't just think about them right away, and I had to figure out ways to remember them or to implement them. And so I did actually create a toolkit on Notion that I use, and at times as well, I've printed things out. I've also compiled strategies and questions specifically for emotional spending and destructive spending. These two are some of my most insidious types of spending that can hit really hard, as well as buying things to fix myself. I just made a video on that. That has hit me particularly hard over the past years. I have pages for each of those that help me think through emotional spending and destructive spending that I can go to when I'm feeling that way. The next thing is to find ways to make my no-buy fun. I have videos for this too. I 100% would recommend project panning, tracking empties, building a capsule wardrobe, or trying it out. These are things I would do regardless if I was on YouTube or not. And I did do all of these things the first time around, and I would not do this differently. I would do this again, but down the road. Like I would totally do all of these things again and totally recommend. And there's so many little ways to gamify your no-buy and to make it fun. Hello, low-buy bingo, but we could make it no-buy bingo. Or if you're in a transition stage, because I don't think everybody can just cold turkey it and just stop shopping, this could be a good way to transition into a no-buy. And I think as well, starting off with a low buy and easing into a no buy can just be the play. But I'm not you. And so you need to figure out what would be your best option and trying things out. And I think that would come more in like step number 2, once you've figured out your habits, to figure out, is the low buy the right play or is the no buy the right play? And I have an entire video on basically this question. I would also eventually start asking myself what enough means to me. And this is something like this consideration alone helped me almost overnight kick my makeup spending and my desire for new makeup to the curb. I mean, I'm not perfect, but this one question has made all of the difference in how I think about my stuff and what is enough. And I'm being serious on like actually figuring out what is enough, because when I was shopping, I just wanted to buy things ultimately because it felt good, but I also enjoyed makeup and I was buying things because I was buying things that I enjoyed. I never once stopped to think like, do I have enough? What is enough? And yeah, a lot of us have asked more practical questions like, could I see myself using this up to completion? Do I want to use this up? Do I already like, how many years worth of makeup do I already own? But I think before overwhelming yourself with all of these questions, you could just start to think, what is enough? Do I have enough? What does that even mean? And what I did in effort to figure this out for makeup was to create a minimalist makeup bag. And so even though I'm not a makeup minimalist, it really helped me figure out what feels like enough to me so I can give myself a goal or something to strive to. And so if you're trying to think through this question, maybe the makeup minimalist makeup bag is a way to kick things off for you as well, and to help you consider what feels like enough for you in your life. I wouldn't do this at the very beginning. I would do this probably when I would be experiencing a lull, which would be right now, or when I needed to shake things up, which, for me would be roughly mid-year. And I think that focusing on habits and like the intro to the no-buy would probably be enough to have on my plate. And I might not know at the very beginning what enough felt like. And so once enough time has passed and experience has passed, then I would start thinking about these questions. The next thing I would do would be to develop or figure out hobbies to take the place of other habits. As I've already mentioned, that we need to replace all of our bad habits or bad hobbies with good ones, or ones that aren't destructive or just feel better. I didn't realize how much time I spent shopping until I stopped and I had a lot of free time on my hands that I sometimes instinctively just went to the computer, went to my phone to go shop. I think that spending time offline and spending more time away from your smartphone or your computer, the better off that you'll be. And creating things in your life that are fulfilling, that are making you happy and making your life more filled with joy, I think are just great on their own. But to replace those one for one with shopping or other destructive hobbies, I think is another bonus just on top of that. And I have talked about this at length the last couple of months, so I'm just going to leave that one there. The next thing I would do, and the very last thing, would be to consider seeing a therapist. I was completely unaware of how much would come up when I was doing my no-buy, because I kind of thought like, oh, it's just about the stuff. But the stuff was ever rarely about the stuff. The stuff was never about the stuff. I mean, I can't say that for you, but for me, the stuff was rarely about the stuff. I was completely caught off guard with just how much time and energy I spent connecting myself with stuff. I just put out a video on trying to fix myself with stuff. I will link that as well in the cards. These were connections that I was starting to make back in 2020, and it was very disconcerting to think about all of the things I told myself with stuff, all the stories I told myself about stuff, that I would be better and happier if I owned this thing, or I'm not worthy about this thing, or what have you. And it really dragged up or dredged up emotions that I was not expecting to feel. Like that was just not on my radar at all with the no-buy, and nobody had ever talked about it. It caught me off guard. So I would have absolutely seen a therapist when I started it. Maybe not like right away, but I feel like working through the narratives and stories I tell myself about stuff would have just been really helpful. I just want to say, like, there is no shame in going to therapy ever. I think that just about everybody could probably benefit from seeing a therapist. And I've felt certain types of ways about sharing that online. Like, what would people think of me? Not in terms of seeking therapy, but it's like my no-buy made me, like, I was so attached with stuff that I need a therapist to help me through it. And there was some like embarrassment with that. But in reality, like, I think a lot of us use shopping in ways that, sorry, I don't want to speak for everybody. I'll speak for me. I've used shopping in ways that are destructive and problematic. And dealing with destructive spending and emotional spending are things that I didn't need to deal with alone. And I told myself some really harmful and negative things, or they were attached to destructive and emotional spending. So I think therapy is completely underrated when it comes to the no-buy sphere and like dealing with the potential fallouts of not shopping. This really just makes me think of some of the conversations I've been hearing of as late of, things that women care about as trivial, basically shopping as trivial. Shopping is not trivial, and also the issues related to it or the fallout is not trivial either. I mean, none of us have completely the same experiences, and I think I had some of that misogynistic language, kind of sexist language about shopping and my expectations around it, where I didn't seek help that would have benefited me. I guess, didn't mean to end on a little bit of a sad note, but it doesn't have to be. And if I can urge you in this video to do anything, is to start thinking about habits and the habits that you have and have accumulated. And also, if you've been on your no-buy for 6 months or 8 months or however long it's been, a month, and you haven't noticed your habits, you haven't spent time doing that, it's never too late, friends. Like, it's never too late. You can always start new things at any time, which is so beautiful. So I hope that if you haven't considered your habits, this is your call to do that. I would love to hear your tips in the comments down below. This is the video that is made for the community. I would love to hear any comments or tips you have in the description box below. I'd love to hear your knowledge that you've accumulated through your experience. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If you liked this video, I'd love it if you would subscribe. And I also have a second channel and an Etsy store that you can check out, as well as a Buy Me a Coffee if you would like to support the work that I do on this channel. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again around here soon.